Magandang umaga, gising na Pilipinas. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of The Daily Dose. I want to ask you a question. What do you take for granted in your life? What do you take for granted? You know, all of us have things that we appreciate more than others, and I think that all of us show our appreciation in different ways, but all of us can say safely that there are different things in our lives that we take for granted. For you teenagers out there, you're probably taking your parents for granted. Whatever it may be, maybe it's your boss, you're taking them for granted. Maybe bosses, you're taking your employees for granted. Maybe students, you're taking your schooling for granted, not studying as much. Whatever it is, we all have things we take for granted. Maybe it's your health. I want to encourage us with the scripture. Let's turn to James chapter 4. You know, taking things for granted is something that people have struggled with, well, since the beginning of time, because it's human nature. But in James chapter 4, James, the half-brother of Jesus, speaking to the church of Jerusalem, has this to say. He says, now listen. Now, if James, the half-brother of Jesus, probably looked a little bit like Jesus, if he said listen, you're probably going to listen. He says, now listen, you who say. So we all say a lot of things. You who say, today or tomorrow, we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins. This is a heavy teaching right here. You know, James is trying to speak to the church in taking for granted the most valuable currency in our life. It's not cryptocurrency. It's not pesos. It's not gold. It's not anything else. It's time. Time is the single greatest currency that every single one of us have, and everyone is equally rich with time. Doesn't matter how smart you are or are not. Doesn't matter how beautiful and handsome you are or are not. None of those things matter. Everyone gets 24 hours in a day, and that's what we get. It's those that utilize that time the most that make a difference in this world. And James is speaking to a group of people that are misusing their time. What are they doing to misuse their time? They're treating it like they own it. A lot of times we treat our time like we own it and we take it for granted. Now, there's nothing wrong with relaxing and sleeping in here and there. These things are going to happen, but are we taking it for granted? Do we live our lives understanding that we will eventually run out of time? And James says, you guys say, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, this is how we're going to live our life. He says, that's not wise. Instead, you should say, hey, if it is the Lord's will, we will do this or that. He says that ultimately, to live your life without considering God in your life is like boasting and bragging. And I know we've been around people that boast and brag, and it's one of the most unattractive and annoying things that there is. Humility is an incredible trait. And one thing that we have to display humility in is not taking our lives for granted, not taking our relationship with God for granted. James even says that it goes far that anyone who knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's a sin. I think it's a sin when we, in our conscience, when we don't do what we know we should, not being disciplined, but moreover, it's a sin when we disregard God in our lives. Maybe you've said to yourself, well, I'll become a Christian later. I'll go after that area of my life later. That's a sin. To take time for granted is a sin. The Bible even says that your life is like a mist. I mean, just look at this. It's gone almost instantaneously. That's what James says. He says your life is but a mist. Don't take time for granted. Utilize the time that you have in your relationship with God. In every area of your life, don't take things for granted. Your schooling, your family. Don't take your parents or your grandparents for granted, or anyone in your family for that matter, because people die all the time. And funerals are always a sad affair because it's people that are wishing they would have utilized their time better. But you know what? There's nothing you can do now. That person is gone forever. And people talk, hey, we need to spend more time, let's hang out. And they don't do it. Why? Because the root issue is because they take time for granted. Don't take your time for granted. I think about a time in my life when I took time for granted. In high school, I competed in wrestling nationwide and even competed in a couple of worldwide tournaments. And I remember there was a tournament for our high school, and we went to another state to compete in a huge annual tournament that was a very important tournament that we always look forward to every year. And I was a senior in high school. It was my last year, and the week had come up, and we were going to fly out on a Thursday. And I didn't take advantage of cutting weight, losing weight. And so I wrestled at 160 pounds, or you might use kilograms, but I was about 5 kilograms overweight. And I waited until Friday to try and lose the weight after we were there. And weigh-ins were on Saturday morning. And so we arrived there, I'm running and running and running. And the morning of, just a couple hours before weigh-ins, I'm still overweight by about 1.5 kilograms. And so we get there early, I'm running, and I'm getting desperate now because I'm running out of time. And I'll never forget, my team is standing there because we're all weighing in together. And I step on the scale, and I'm 0.2 kilograms overweight. I was forfeited from the competition. The money they had spent on me to go there, for the hotel, for the flights, for everything, my team was so disappointed. It was a terrible, terrible feeling in my life because I had taken for granted the time that I had had. I didn't utilize the time, and it reached a point where I stepped up to the scale and nothing more could be done. You know, the reality is all of us are going to die one day, and all of us are going to face God. And when that day comes, it's too late. There is no more time left. And using the mentality of, well, I'll take care of this later. It's boastful and it's arrogant and it's not right. You got to take advantage of your life right now. I want to challenge you. What is the biggest weakness in your relationship with God? Stop making excuses. Stop procrastinating. Set up time to talk to someone today. Be open about that area of your life. It may be embarrassing. It's less embarrassing than having to stand before God, having to know that you didn't deal with your relationship with Him on this earth. Set up time. Be open with them and get the spiritual help that you need. I want to encourage you, please. Message me. Message the chat group. Set up time to do a Bible study. Set up time with someone that can help you through these challenges in your life. But don't take time for granted. One of the greatest feelings in the world is when you don't take time for granted. When you do study, and you do study ahead of time, and you get an A on that test. When I did go after making my weight, and I made the weight, and then I felt the reward. You know, at the end of the day, the single greatest experience we will ever have is when we get to heaven, and we hear God say, well done, my good and my faithful servant. The single worst feeling anyone will ever experience is if you get to heaven and God says, I don't know you. Away from me, you evildoer. Don't take time for granted. Get right in your relationship with God. Have a great day.